My name is Rose Walters, and for my paper 3 on security, I will be analyzing the following question. To what extent do refugee movements affect internal security with reference to the Dadaab refugee camps in Kenya? Security can be interpreted in multiple ways. For example, from a liberal theorist perspective, they often believe in collective security, meaning that states and non-state actors should work multilaterally in order to not only secure their own safety, but also the national and global community. However, realists believe in national security, meaning that a state should have the capacity to be able to defend itself. And it often puts a premium on military power, meaning assuming that the more militarily powerful a state is, the more likely it's to be secure. I will be specifically looking more at a national and internal security. According to the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, a refugee is somebody who is forced to flee his and her country because of persecution, war, and violence. In most cases, they are unable or afraid to return back home. And a refugee movement implies the involuntary migration of refugees. According to the African Union Security and Peace Council, they have acknowledged that there's a legitimate, substantial threat in Dadaab and the refugee camps. This is because the terrorist group Al-Shabaab, who has been really active in this region, has been using these camps and infiltrating them and planning attacks. They have exploited the camps and have planned not only attacks on refugees, but also institutions and civilians. The Kenyan minister has also backed up this statement by saying that they have been smuggling in weapons and also been training for attacks just like the one they did in 2013 at Nairobi's Westgate Mall, where 67 people were killed. Alongside that, the Kenyan government spokesperson has said that the camp has lost its natural humanitarian nature and become a safe haven for terrorism and the illegal activities. It's interesting to note that these perspectives all come from an African or regional and dominant and domestic perspective. However, on the other side, this is more an international perspective. The UN security level has classified northern Kenya, which includes Dadaab, as a 4 out of 6 substantial threat. However, this is not an accurate representation, as these are determined by 5 categories, which are armed conflict, terrorism, crime, civil unrest, and hazards. However, most of these, for example, civil unrest, hazards, and crime do not apply to Dadaab refugee camps, because hazards, for example, natural earthquakes and floods don't really apply to the internal security with the Dadaab refugee camps. Alongside this, Amnesty International UK has said that there's not really a substantial threat yet. However, once you start displacing these refugees, it will just increase the instability in this region even more. And lastly, they believe that it is not necessarily the terrorists that they have said that closing the camp will not necessarily reduce terrorist attacks. It's basically that there has been a lack in just the overall operations, and not just because of these refugee camps. And lots of human rights advocates have also supported this statement. So the international security hasn't really been doing much in the Dadaab refugee camps in order to actually help Kenya. The only humanitarian intervention or efforts that have been put into place have come from the UN. The UN has provided humanitarian and security staff that have been stationed in Dadaab. But because Dadaab is the world's largest refugee camp, it is overwhelming and underfunded, therefore allowing the monitoring of these camps not to be effective. Another thing is that complex administration, logistics, and security operations have been managed by the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees. However, this camp consists of 4 camps. The Dadaab camps consist out of 4 camps, and it spreads over 50 square kilometers, which is a massive area to be able to actually regulate. And it's clearly not been successful, as Al-Shabaab has been able to use these camps and actually plan operations without real speculation, therefore lacking a security operation agenda. And although the UN High Commissioners for Refugees has contributed 3.6 million towards the Kenyan police in general, there has just been a lack of actually management from Kenya and providing security in Dadaab. Therefore, more funds and expertise are still needed, however, they are not given. Therefore, it leaves the question, why should we even bother? Why should we help Kenya? Well, this is really significant because so far it's been a really regional and even just one state issue. However, it can quickly escalate. And this can become a quick terrorism. Terrorism can become, if this Dadaab refugee camp doesn't get closed, it will just increase terrorism risk even more, increasing the threat to global security and instability. And it's also that if this does spread, many countries and organizations might be underprepared because of this new context. For example, this can be seen in Europe with the terrorism that has been going on, such as the attacks in Paris, London, and Brussels. Terrorism is also super hard to actually attack because it's unpredictable, and it's really hard to define nowadays in a globalized world where who to specifically capture and give attention to, because terrorism can happen anywhere due to the connections between disparity groups, and it's easy to move across borders. It might also cause an eroding trust in multilateralism, which for liberal theorists is crucial, as they believe that it is the most effective way to bring countries together and actually solve problems. However, realists believe that multilateralism is ineffective because of the slow process, and that they never know whether they are actually working out of the problem or for their national interests. So then it leaves the question, Europe has limited refugee entries due to national security threats, so why can't Kenya? Well, this is because the UN is perceived as being more legitimate due to their power, not only through their military power, but also through their finance. And this can be seen as, according to an Amnesty International report that was released, the EU has spent the last 18 months actually violating international law and making financial deals in order to prevent refugees from coming into Europe due to the national security threat. They have also handled the refugee crisis by, so this has actually given more grip to Kenya, saying, well, the EU has done this, so why can't we? Well, this is, the EU justified this because it was done because of counterterrorism, but this is the same excuse for Kenya. Well, this is because they have financial power, and they're using this in order to get what they want. So the EU Trust Fund has provided an initial budget for 777 million for the Greater Horn of Africa until 2020. So this provides a huge assistance in these countries and provides them to increase their capacity in refugee movements. But the EU has involved in this because they are scared that if they don't invest money, which is the easiest way for the EU because they make a huge amount of the GDP in the global population, it will prevent refugee movements from spreading across to North Africa and then maybe overseas to Europe. And therefore, they might be using their national interests to prevent and protect their own state. However, the other perspective is that the EU is actually trying to help Kenya because they notice that there's overall poor security management, and that they're providing this to the Greater Horn of Africa because these refugees are moving over from Somalia, so therefore they're benefiting and helping Somalia through financial aid. However, to what extent do refugee movements affect internal security with reference to the Dadaab refugee camps in Kenya? I believe, to a large extent, to a medium extent.